Many thanks, Mr. Chairman. The last time I was in Japan, it was 40 years ago. I was on a rugby tour. Unfortunately, I'm now too old to represent our country in the World Cup next year, so I have come here. It's a real pleasure to come to Japan, and you have a wonderful country, and it's been a great conference. What I'd like to do today is talk a little about what's happening in the UK with Johne's control, and also to share with you some experiences from farmers in terms of how they feel we are progressing with our Johne's control management in the UK. Myself, I work in private practice, so I'm dealing with farmers on a daily basis in terms of how to actually manage Johne's disease. I also work with Dick Sibley, who's with us here today. We have a computer program which we've used to predict and prevent Johne's disease within dairy herds, and we've used that in over 2,000 herds now. I'm not talking about that today, I'm just going to talk about the survey. Just a little background, the UK National Johne's Management Plan, this was started back in 2010, and it's a commercial program. The farmer basically pays for any of the testing, pays for any of the veterinary time. And what we've created is a voluntary framework. And this really describes how the vet and farmer should work to reduce the prevalence of Johne's disease in their herds. And it became absolutely evident that the success of any Johne's control program is entirely dependent on how well you can enthuse both the vet and the farmer in terms of controlling the disease. There is no way you can just use a simple test and make this disease go away at farm level. You know, the majority of the work has to be done by the farmer, and so that's very, very important. And we incorporated that methodology in our framework from the very early days. And so we conducted a survey in 2016 really just to see what more we need to do to try and sort of make sure we have continued success. Now, Richard Whittington has just described what is required for a robust control program. Now, we're not delivering a robust control program, but I think what we are delivering is a robust framework for the management of disease. So the long-term objectives of the Johne's management plan is to control and reduce the incidence of Johne's disease in dairy cattle, with a long-term objective of eliminating the disease if it becomes technically and economically feasible to do so. So what we've done is create a framework to reduce the incidence of the disease. When we set the program up, we wanted to make sure we engaged all dairy farms. There is no point. We had a system already in place which was basically based on test and cull. And test and cull programs are deeply unpopular with farmers. So if we try to roll out a test and cull program voluntarily across the country, it's likely we would have engaged maybe 5 or 10% of the farmers at best. So there seemed little point us trying to do that. So we had to create a system where we had a program which would engage all the farmers. The predict and prevent model, which has been championed by Dick Sibley, it's about making sure we put as much effort into protecting the uninfected herds as we do spend on the infected herds. There's a real veterinary bias that can come to exist where we're only interested in farms once they've become infected. Well, obviously that's just nonsensical with Johne's disease. Once the herd is infected, you may have 15, 20 years to remove the infection. So the most important thing to do is to make sure we put a lot of effort into the herds that currently have low prevalence or no demonstrable disease in the farm. And the third point was that we wanted to make sure we removed barriers to engagement, and we wanted to make sure we kept a system in place that motivated vets and farmers to take positive action. So that was the three core principles that we adhere to, and we adhere to them today. The disease is a long-term disease, and it takes a long-term solution. So we started off in a very softly way. So initially, in the early years, we focused most of our effort on veterinary education and farmer education. And so we put a lot of time and effort into making sure that everybody was on side, any fears or concerns were dispelled, and we could have a situation where we could make the farmer and vet believe that it was possible to reduce the presence of Johne's disease in cattle. We devised a structure where there was basically 6 core strategies, and those strategies were dependent on the farmer's aspiration and also the prevalence within the herd. So, for instance, if we have a low prevalence or no evidence of disease there, most of our effort will be directed towards biosecurity, protect and monitor. So we put in place a surveillance strategy, a lightweight surveillance strategy, just to make sure that the disease wasn't present, but we'd focus all the effort on biosecurity. Whereas if the herd on the other extreme was very, very heavily infected, you know, an option could be to incorporate firebreak vaccination. That will be vaccination for a short period of time, and then the farmer may well then choose to adopt a different strategy. And so the intermediate strategies would involve testing, and that was basically how it was set up. So we tried to create a framework for each of those situations, and that would allow any farmer to take part in the program. In 2016, we further strengthened the program, and we felt that there was a need to further sort of educate and motivate the vets. So BCVA, our veterinary organisation, developed a programme where they had an online training programme and certification for vets, and we created over 800 certified vets. And only those vets are allowed to actually sign a certificate now for a farm to say that they have an appropriate control plan in place. We had to create a mechanism making sure that there was credible veterinary-farmer interaction. And so the milk processors were encouraged to actually put rules in place to say that their farmers must actually get one of these forms signed by their accredited vet. So we've ended up with a situation where there's veterinary certification that there is a robust control plan put in place to provide a greater assurance. So the basis of the scheme is fairly straightforward. Each farmer is expected to undertake a risk assessment. Each farmer is expected to undertake a minimum level of surveillance, and some farmers would choose to do whole herd sampling. Some farmers may be doing less. They may be doing 30 or 50 samples. But the most important thing was that the vet and farmer would work together to create an agreed control plan that they believed would work for their farm. So that's the target. By October 31st, 2018, our aim is to have 82% of UK milk supply, and it's expected to have undertaken a veterinary-led risk assessment, surveillance, and have a written Johne's control plan in place, which has been put in place by an accredited vet. So that's basically the framework. Okay, so was it working? What did the farmers think about it? So I conducted a survey. This is using SurveyMonkey. We probably contacted in the order of about 1,200 farmers. It was distributed through veterinary practices, through one or two of the key milk processors, through those that already were undergoing using Johne's control programs. It was a very simple survey, and it was part of something that we were doing. So we did some work with vets, looking at how well they were doing the job. We used the My Healthy Herd program to actually check over 650 farms to see how well they were actually applying the control program. We did some work with the processors, looking at their thoughts about the program. But what I'm going to talk about today is the Net Promoter Survey we did with the farmers. It was a very simple survey, very simple methodology. I wanted it so it was easy for a farmer to complete. I must explain that this was a non-random sample. It was a convenient sample, so there will be survey bias here, so that's important to appreciate. And we distributed it through, as I said, practices and processes and through certain supply chains. And the objective really was to look at the level of engagement, what concerns and problems the farmers had, what benefits they perceived they achieved through Johne's control, and what would help drive further engagement. What was encouraging, and this probably, it does indicate the level of bias we had, that 93% of respondents were already engaged in Johne's control. But what was interesting was that 72% of them had put control plans in place with the vets, but we found that 22% had done it themselves based on what they perceived was the knowledge they'd gleaned from training, from farmer meetings and education. So we will be sweeping those 22% up because those do-it-yourself plans may not be as robust as they could be. And so with this next round, we would expect those ones to be scrutinized more closely by the trained vets. When we asked farmers about what major concerns they might have, there was some quite interesting information that came from that. The good news was that nearly half of the farmers were happy with the control plan they'd got in place. They were comfortable, were on track, it was working for them, everything was working well. However, there were some consistent concerns that were coming back. One was that there was insufficient buildings to segregate cows. It's very common in the UK that we do a test and manage programme where the cows are all tested and then the infected cows are separated at the point of drying off so that they are less likely to infect the calves as they are born. And this is sometimes a challenge. The costs of culling were cited as a concern, and that's the reason why test and cull programmes are so deeply unpopular. And there was some confusion regarding test results. It is quite difficult to interpret test results. They fluctuate. A lot of our farms now, we've got about 2,500 farms now testing their cows every 3 months through the milk. And those milk results will fluctuate on a regular basis. And so that requires expert veterinary interpretation. When they were asked about any problems they'd experienced, we came back to the same issue. Segregation was a concern. And as Richard has alluded, there is a cross-reaction between the TB test and the Johne's test. So if you TB test cattle, then it will elevate the Johne's result for a period of sort of possibly up to 3 months, but in most situations in the first 2 months. And there was quite a lot of concern about when to cull cows. At what point do you actually remove the cows, and how is that best managed? What I think we perhaps need to do a bit more of, though, is to explain the benefits of Johne's control. And this is what the farmers thought about Johne's control. They found that they had a better overall health of the herd. 82% of the respondents felt their herds were healthier as a result of adopting Johne's control. They were able to not simply wait for the animal to become sick or slaughter the animal at the last minute. They were able to plan the removal of animals in the right way, and so it reduced the forced or emergency culling. The calves were healthier, and they had improved farm margins. There were also other wider benefits: reducing anxiety, better opportunities, improving profits, improving health of calves and cows, improving fertility. So these are farmer perceptions, and I think those perceptions, are the reality. So I think it is important for us to be aware that by controlling Johne's disease, it's not just a simple control of one disease. You put the farm into a much better place. When we asked the farmers what best describes how you feel about Johne's control, 78% of the farmers were firm believers in Johne's control. They were convinced that this is the right thing to do. 13% of farmers were controlling Johne's disease for the benefit of their milk processor. And 7% knew they should control Johne's disease, but it was a lower priority right now. We ran a Net Promoter Score question. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this technique, but it's a very, very simple technique, and I gave a paper earlier on this week on selective dry cow therapy. When we ran the same question on selective dry cow therapy, there was a strong negative situations. The farmers were broadly negative about selective dry cow therapy, but the opposite was found here with Johne's control. So 50% of the farmers would strongly recommend Johne's disease control to another farmer. When they were posed with that question, they gave a score of 9 out of 9 or 10. The scale is 1 to 10, and if you score above 8, then you're classified as a promoter. 29% were neutral or passive, and only 21% were classified as detractors or negative. So that basically meant that there was more people that were actually, more farmers that were positive about the disease, about the benefits of controlling it, than those that were detractors. So we've actually created a social norm. It's now the norm within our country to control Johne's disease. You know, if farmers freely talk about it now, and most people actually believe that's the right thing to do. When we asked them what was more likely to adopt a Johne's control program, financial incentives were classified as a strong driver for engagement. So if you want to encourage farmers, if there's a way that you can reward farmers, then it will actually sort of make it more likely to happen on a commercial basis. When we look at those questions in more detail, what we found was that training was quite a strong driver. So more on-farm training on Johne's disease and practical control. More convincing that rewards outweigh the inputs. More evidence that Johne's control works. You know, those are the other elements that were picked up. What we were quite encouraged about, though, was that we've no longer got to a situation where they don't trust the vet. You know, that they were quite comfortable now that their trained vet will deliver. So there was a very interesting paper that was delivered by Ritter in 2016, and she did a social science study splitting up farmers into different groups based on their belief and importance of Johne's control. So if you actually have a farmer that believes Johne's disease is important and also has strong belief in the strategy, they are classified as proactive farmers. Those are very proactive farmers. The opposite to those farmers are the ones that don't believe in Johne's control and don't believe in the importance. Those are deniers. Those are ones are, unfortunately, in our survey, we had very few that were in that category. It was less than 1%. The group that is worthwhile thinking about, though, is the unconcerned farmer. Those are the ones that actually get it. They actually do believe in Johne's control, but it's not important for them right now. You know, and I think that's quite an important group, because that's our target group now. We've got to try and engage those farmers that are yet to actually get going with it. And there was only 2% that were disillusioned with the program. So it's quite an interesting model. Whoops. Is that okay? Can I carry on?
Only 1 minute, please.
1 minute.
Otherwise, we don't have enough time for discussion.
Okay, that's fine. And so basically, what we found, though, when we split this data up, was that if you split it up between proactivists and unconcerned farmers, you will actually basically find that the unconcerned farmers want more convincing that the rewards outweigh the benefits and more evidence that Johne's control works. I think that's very, very important to appreciate, that they want a different message from those that are already converted. So I think to improve the actual engagement, we have to focus on that. So just a summary, the UK National Johne's Management Plan has been accepted by farmers, a social norm has been created, and I think if we're going to extend that programme to those unconcerned farmers, we need to have subtly different messages which are going to be focusing on strengthening the importance in those farmers' minds and the priority of Johne's control. So, thank you.